Have you ever heard of a formula that transforms any ordinary person into someone truly prosperous? And that is not written in any book nor taught by any bank? A formula so simple, it fits into 3 numbers, but so powerful that it forever changes the way you view money, time, and even life. My grandfather called it the 3-number formula: 40, 30, and 20. I was just a child when I first saw him sitting at the kitchen table repeating these numbers silently, as if praying. At that time, I thought he just calculated expenses, added up what was left over for the month, and counted old coins. But I was wrong. He didn't count money. He counted order. My grandfather believed that the world is divided into 2 types of people: those who control their own money and those who live obeying other people's money. And he said that the difference between them fit into 3 numbers: 40, 30, and 20, which he called the measures of the man who sleeps in peace. For years, I thought it was an old man's habit, until the day I realized there was something extraordinary hidden in that simplicity. He wasn't rich, he never was, but I've never seen him worried either. While neighbors despaired over debts, he remained calm, as if the storm had not reached him. And I asked myself, how can someone without fortune live with such security? It was only later that I understood. The secret was not in how much he had, but in how he divided what he had. What made him different was the way he viewed money. He said, "Money is like the wind. If you don't direct it, it takes you away." And every time he repeated this, I realized he wasn't talking about finances, but about conscience. Back then, there were no spreadsheets, apps, or millionaire mindset courses. But in ancient families, especially Jewish ones, there were principles passed down silently, like blessings disguised as routine. And this formula was one of them. My grandfather believed that wealth does not begin in the pocket, but in habit. And that lack of control is the first sign of poverty, even when the house seems full. Those who don't know how to share what they have, he said, end up being divided by life. Simple words, but I only truly understood them when I started to see the world through his eyes. In my youth, I looked for shortcuts. I worked more, accumulated, spent, and the more I earned, the more I lacked. It was during this cycle that I remembered the 3 figures and decided to test them. I took an old notebook and wrote 40, 30, 20. And for the first time, I understood what he meant by telling order. Because when you start sharing consciously, anxiety disappears. Money is no longer the enemy, and the future suddenly stops being scary. For centuries, Jewish sages understood something that the modern world still ignores. True wealth is not in the amount you earn, but in the clarity with which you organize what you have. This formula, 40, 30, and 20, is older than any financial manual. It was born from simple wisdom, from the practical life of those who learned to survive in times of war, crisis, and exile. It's a philosophy that teaches what banks will never tell you: that power isn't in money, it's in control. My grandfather used to say that chaos begins when people spend without knowing why, when money stops being an instrument and becomes anesthesia. And that's when I understood. The mistake isn't in wanting to live well, but in confusing comfort with peace. Peace is not about buying everything you want. Peace is knowing that you lack nothing. I remember one cold night when he called me over and asked, "Do you know why the world runs so much after money, but never achieves it?" I shook my head. And he replied, "Because no one learns to respect it. Everyone wants to possess it, but few want to understand it." That night, he opened his notebook, the same one where he wrote down the 3 numbers, and said, "Whoever lives by this order will never be a slave, and whoever ignores it will always serve someone." Those words have echoed within me for years, and the more I saw people losing everything, the more I remembered that warning. Today, I know this formula is not about economics. It is about emotional freedom. It is not a rigid rule, but a philosophy that transforms fear into discipline. And those who practice it discover something rare, that it is possible to live with little and still feel whole. But there's a reason why almost no one talks about it, Banks don't want you to have control. They thrive when you lose track of your own limits. When you live each month waiting for the next paycheck, the next credit, the next miracle. But whoever understands this formula does not depend on that. And that is precisely why it was kept silent, passed only among those who knew the value of balance. My grandfather used to say, when you organize what you have, the world rearranges itself around you. And perhaps that is why, even without apparent wealth, he always seemed rich. Rich in time, in serenity, in autonomy. He didn't hoard things, he hoarded control. And that's why, decades later, while many seek miraculous secrets, I return to his simplicity. 3 numbers, 3 principles, 3 ways of living. 40, to honor the gift. 30, to grow in the future. 20, to gain freedom. But what do each of these numbers really mean? Why do they work in any era, in any crisis, in any country? And how can a simple habit of division completely change a person's destiny? These are the questions my grandfather left for me, and now I leave them for you. Because when you understand the meaning of the first number, 40 bast, you will realize that it was never about money. It was always about respect. And that's where the real story begins. For a long time, I believed that wealth was simply a matter of luck, talent, or opportunity. I grew up hearing that some are born with a gift for making money, while others have to settle for survival. But the more I observed the world, the more I realized that luck doesn't explain everything, because I saw intelligent, hard-working people who remained stuck in the same cycle: work, pay bills, start over. And I saw others, often simple, living comfortably, even without great earnings. It was then that I understood what my grandfather always wanted to teach me. The difference isn't in how much you earn, but in how you live. My grandfather used to say that most people spend their entire lives trying to earn more, when they should first learn to control what they already have. He called this the invisible legacy, a lesson that isn't left in a written inheritance, but that transforms a family's destiny for generations. He learned this from his father, and his father from his grandfather, in a lineage of men who didn't leave fortunes, but who did leave method and wisdom. When I was little, I used to watch how he organized everything: food, tools, even time. Nothing was random, everything had its place, every minute had a purpose, and one day he told me something I've never forgotten. The mess on the outside begins when there's a mess on the inside. Financial instability is just a reflection of emotional instability. At the time, I didn't understand, but years later, when money started slipping through my fingers, I realized he was right. I saw this happen with friends too. Good, hard-working people who earned well yet lived suffocated by debt, always feeling like they never had enough money. And I saw others with lower incomes, living calmly, traveling, helping their families, and even saving a little each month. What set them apart wasn't their salary, it was their behavior. One had order, the other urgency. One dominated money, the other was dominated by it. I remember a friend who worked with me saying, "When I start earning more, then I'll be able to save." That then never came. He changed jobs, raised his salary, but the feeling of scarcity remained the same. Because it wasn't the amount that changed, it was the mindset. The problem wasn't how much came in, but how much flowed out without direction. And that's why my grandfather said, "Those who don't set limits are defined by their excess." Over time, I've realized that most people's biggest mistake is confusing freedom with lack of control. They believe that freedom means being able to spend as they please, when in reality, freedom is being able to choose without fear. And to achieve this, structure is necessary. Ancient families knew this. They didn't wait for surplus money to be created before organizing. They organized so that there would be surplus. They created an internal logic, an invisible hierarchy that kept everything in balance, even in difficult times. My grandfather lived through wars, inflation, and crises, yet he never lost his composure. He used to say, "Money is just the messenger of your relationship with the world. If you live in chaos, money will be chaotic. If you live in order, it will flow with order." And perhaps this is the lesson most lacking today. It's not the world that needs to change, it's the way you relate to it. There was a time when our family went through a difficult time. My father's work had stopped, and our income had dropped by almost half. Most people would have despaired, but I remember my grandfather gathering us together and saying, "Let's not change the numbers, let's change the rhythm." He took out the same old notebook, opened it to the first page, and wrote down the three numbers again: 40, 30, 20. "The formula is the same," he said. "Only the size of the slices changes, but the balance remains." At that moment, I realized it wasn't about finances. It was about self-control. It was about not giving in to fear. While others saw scarcity, he saw an opportunity to reorganize. And that's one of the greatest lessons anyone can learn, understanding that the problem isn't lack, but a lack of structure. From then on, I began to see money as an extension of my own discipline, and I noticed something curious. Every time I lost emotional control, my finances also spiraled out of control. When I was calm, everything balanced out. It was as if money responded to my inner state. And that's when I understood what my grandfather meant when he said, "Money is silence. It doesn't like shouting, rushing, or impulses. It thrives on order." This realization changed everything. I began to observe how the people I admired lived. I realized that the truly rich, not the show-offs but the quiet ones, had one thing in common: routine and purpose. They didn't let themselves be carried away by chance. They were clear about where every penny went, and most impressively, they seemed to live better with less. It wasn't ostentation, it was lightness. And that's precisely what the banks don't want you to understand, because a man with clarity and method is a man who doesn't need to ask. The system needs you to always live on the edge, always in debt, always dependent. But those who learn to create their own structure become useless to the system and free within it. The true legacy my grandfather left wasn't a house nor a cash inheritance. It was a mindset, a way of seeing life as something that needs to be shared to flourish. He said, "What is shared wisely grows. What is held in fear dies." And this applies to money, time, and relationships. So, before talking about the numbers, he wanted me to understand the principle. The formula doesn't work if the mind is still trapped in the fear of lack. You must first build respect, and respect begins when you look at what you have, no matter how small it seems, and decide to treat it purposefully. Most people want to earn more to feel at peace, but it's exactly the opposite. Only those who find peace first learn to earn more, because peace gives clarity, and clarity creates direction. And that's why my grandfather called the formula the map of the serene man. He said that the first step to prosperity is not winning, it is organizing. And that's what we're going to do now. Because when you understand the true meaning of the number 40, you'll realize that wealth starts long before money. It starts with the way you live. My grandfather used to say that the first number in the formula was the hardest to grasp because it required a change in mindset, not just in math. 40%. This was the limit he himself had set for himself to live on. 40% for everything visible: housing, food, transportation, everyday life. And as simple as it seemed, it was this measure that separated tranquility from slavery. He said that those who live within their means live to pay for the past. Those who learn to live with less build the future. At first I thought it was impossible. How could anyone live well using only 40% of what they earn? But that's when I realized the point. It's not about math, it's about consciousness. Because the problem isn't the money coming in, but the void that tries to be filled with it. My grandfather explained that many people spend to feel valued. They buy clothes to be seen, cars to be heard, and objects to feel safe. But in the end, what they're trying to buy is just respect. And respect is never for sale. One day I asked him, "But what if I want more comfort? What if I want something better?" He calmly replied, "Then first learn to deserve what you already have. True comfort isn't what you buy, it's what you feel." These words echoed in my mind for years. And the more time passed, the more I realized that luxury is not the opposite of poverty. Luxury is the opposite of peace. Because luxury creates comparison, and comparison is the beginning of lack. Think about it. How many times have you bought something believing it would make you happier, only for the feeling to last only a few days? How many times has the pleasure of owning quickly turned into a worry about keeping it? This is how the cycle begins. Desire turns into debt, debt turns into fear, and fear turns into routine. The modern world thrives on this mechanism. But ancient families knew that abundance isn't born from excess, it's born from limits. When you choose to live on 40%, something changes, not just in your budget, but within you. Suddenly, money stops being a burden and becomes a tool again. You stop chasing it and start walking with it. My grandfather used to say that this was the true secret to prosperity. The rich man is not the one who can buy everything, but the one who doesn't need to prove anything. The 40% discipline isn't about restriction, it's about freedom. Because when you spend less than you earn, you gain something no one can take away: calmness. But perhaps the most important question is, why exactly 40%? Why not 50 or 60? My grandfather used to say that 40 was the number of maturity. In Jewish tradition, the number 40 appears repeatedly. 40 days of the flood, 40 years in the desert, 40 days of spiritual preparation. It's the number of transformation. And in financial life, it represents the same thing: the process of maturing desire. Living with 40% is crossing the desert of impulse until you find the oasis of control. It's ceasing to be guided by will and beginning to be guided by conscience. At one point, I tried applying this rule for the first time. It was difficult at first, because the whole world pushes you in the opposite direction. Ads tell you you deserve more, social media makes you believe you're behind, and the system creates 1,000 ways to make you spend what you haven't even earned yet. But when I resisted and started applying the 40%, something unexpected happened. I stopped feeling guilty. Guilt for not having, for not buying, for not keeping up with others. The calm that came afterward was the first sign of wealth I truly felt. My grandfather called this the measure of respect. He said that when money is used with respect, it naturally multiplies, and when it's used with vanity, it runs away. The difference isn't in the bills, it's in the intention. The same amount that frees one man can imprison another, depending on the reason for using it. And perhaps this is the lesson most haven't learned yet. Money doesn't change who you are. It only increases the volume of what already exists within you. If there is order, money increases peace. If there is chaos, it amplifies fear. But what does living on 40% really mean? It's not living with less, it's living with purpose. It's learning to say enough when the world teaches you to say more. It's looking at something beautiful and deciding you don't need it right now. It's choosing what is enough and discovering that enough is the very point where abundance begins. I saw people with little money living in grandeur, people who bought what they needed, but always with joy. And I saw rich people surrounded by luxury, living in emptiness and anxiety. That's why my grandfather said, "Wealth doesn't live in things, it lives in how you use them." These words seem simple, but they're the heart of the formula. Because without this awareness, your 30s and 20s are meaningless. If you don't learn to live with respect, you'll never learn to grow or save. Some people say to me, "But I want to enjoy life now. I don't want to live saving." And I always reply, enjoying isn't wasting. Enjoying is choosing what really matters. The 40% discipline doesn't take anything away from you. It gives you back control. And when you have control, you can decide when and how to enjoy yourself. That's freedom, not limitation. The first number in the formula isn't the hardest because it requires calculation. It's the hardest because it requires courage. Courage to resist the rush of the world. Courage to say no to the superfluous and yes to the essential. Courage to understand that living well isn't about spending a lot, it's about spending wisely. And when this courage is born, something changes. Money stops being an end in itself and becomes merely a reflection of an organized life. My grandfather used to say, live on 40% and you will see that peace costs less than you imagine. And it's true. When I learned to live like this, I discovered that peace of mind is a luxury that fits any budget. And that's when I realized what he really wanted to show me. The 40% isn't about money. It's about respect for who you are and what you have. But if 40% represents the present, the now, then what comes next? What do the next numbers in the formula mean? My grandfather used to say that living with respect is the first step. The second is growing with wisdom. And that's what comes next. My grandfather used to say that the second number in the formula was the silent engine of wealth, 30%. This was the part he called the seed portion. It was what made life flourish, even when the ground seemed dry. He believed that those who don't set aside part of their income for growth get stuck in the same place, repeating the same month for years, only changing the dates. And perhaps that's why so many people work so hard and feel like they never get anywhere, because they live only to maintain, not to evolve. I remember the first time I saw him talk about this with my father. We were in the wood shop, and he said, "The difference between a man who survives and a man who thrives is the courage to invest in himself." My father didn't understand much about finance, but he understood learning. He always said, "Tools rust, the body ages, but knowledge never fades." And that's how he lived. Every month he set aside an amount, no matter how small, to learn something new. Sometimes it was a book, sometimes a short trip, sometimes a new work technique. He said that every investment in oneself came back multiplied, not in immediate cash, but in opportunities. There's a curious fact that confirms this. A Stanford University study showed that, on average, people who continue learning new skills after age 40 increase their chances of financial stability by up to 60%. And it's not because they earn more, but because they become more adaptable. In a world that changes so rapidly, those who stop growing become obsolete, and those who grow a little each day become indispensable. That's exactly what the 30% represents, the commitment to never stop, but almost no one does. Most people spend everything they have trying to appear successful, while the truly wealthy invest in becoming indispensable. The statistics are clear. More than 70% of people invest absolutely nothing in personal or professional development throughout the year. And the result is predictable. They live stuck in the same routine, hoping something will change on its own. But the world doesn't change out of pity. It changes through preparation. My grandfather called this 30% the food of the future. He said that just as the body needs nourishment to grow, the mind needs stimulation, and that every penny spent on learning is a seed planted in a field no one can invade. He believed that money invested in knowledge was the only investment that could not be lost, not through crisis, not through error, not through bad luck. You can lose everything, he said, but you never lose what has already become a part of you. When I started applying this part of the formula, I realized the returns were real. After a few months, opportunities began to appear. I could solve problems more easily, understand people better, and negotiate with greater clarity. The growth was invisible at first, but constant. It was as if each book, each conversation, each course created a new layer of strength. And that's when I understood. The money you save can protect you, but the money you invest in yourself transforms you. But why do so many people resist this? Because learning requires patience, and modern society teaches haste. We live surrounded by quick promises: get rich in 7 days, earn without effort, achieve instant success. This illusion kills growth. Ancient families knew that growth is a slow harvest, and that everything that grows slowly lasts longer. That's why the formula doesn't talk about random percentages, it talks about discipline. My grandfather used to say that 30% isn't spending, it's building. Every reel that goes toward growth is a brick placed in something invisible but lasting, your autonomy. And you might be wondering, but what exactly goes into that 30%? The answer is simple: Everything that helps you evolve: books, courses, travel, instruments, therapy, conversations with people better than you, quality time with those who teach you something. Even making mistakes is part of this investment, because mistakes also teach you. The important thing is that this part never stops. He said that if you didn't learn anything new in a month, that month was wasted, even if you made money, because money without growth becomes just a well-paid survival. A story that has always stuck with me was about my father's neighbor. He owned a small grocery store and said he didn't need to study anything because he could do math in his head. Over time, the market changed, apps and new management methods emerged, and he couldn't adapt. The store closed, and he said, "The world betrayed me, but the world doesn't betray anyone. It just keeps moving forward. Those who don't grow stay still, and standing still is the same as going backward." On the other hand, I met a simple seamstress who saved part of her earnings to learn new techniques. Each year she took a different course, studied fashion, learned about fabrics. 10 years later, she opened her own studio, and people who previously scoffed at her began working for her. This woman never won the lottery, never had any luck. She simply applied the second part of the formula, the 30% that builds the future. There's an ancient concept that Jewish sages call hinuch, which means education, but not just in the scholastic sense. It's education as polishing. It's the process of shaping a human being until they become a nobler version of themselves. That's what the 30% represents, honing one's own potential until the world recognizes one's worth. And there's something almost spiritual about it, because the more you grow, the more the world gives you back in the form of opportunities. Doors that seemed closed begin to open, not because the universe conspired, but because you've become someone prepared to walk through them. Learning creates a silent energy. It changes the way you speak, think, and decide. And without realizing it, others begin to treat you differently. When I realized this, I realized what my grandfather meant when he said, "The poor wait to have leftovers so they can learn. The rich learn so they have leftovers." And it was there that I understood that the formula isn't a miracle. It's a way of building a destiny. The 40% teaches you to live with respect. The 30% teaches you to grow with purpose. But the last number is still missing, the most feared and the most liberating. Because the 20% don't talk about winning, nor about learning. They talk about something that few understand until they feel it: freedom. My grandfather used to say that the last 20% was the heart of the formula. He called it the peace reserve. It wasn't about hoarding, it was about breathing. It was the space that separated those who were always rushing from those who knew how to wait. He said that every man needs to have a piece of silence stored away, and that money was just one way to build that silence. Because deep down, the 20% represents something much bigger than savings. It represents freedom. When I was young, I thought saving money was a sign of fear. I thought those who saved too much were missing out on life. But over time, I realized the opposite. The real fear is not having a choice. The fear of having to accept what you don't want, of depending on someone you don't respect, of saying yes for lack of options. And that's precisely what the 20% is for, to create the possibility of saying no. It's money that allows you to choose, to breathe, and to think calmly before acting. My grandfather used to keep old bills in a brown envelope, tucked away in a drawer that no one touched. I thought it was strange, because sometimes something was missing at home, and he'd rather postpone a purchase than touch that envelope. One day I asked why. He looked at me and said, "Because this money isn't for spending. It's for not selling myself." I didn't understand at the time, but years later I realized he was talking about dignity. That 20% was the invisible boundary between him and despair. Most people live on the edge. They work all month, and on the last day they're already waiting for their next paycheck. The system wants it that way because a person without reserves is a controlled person. It's the employee who accepts what they don't want, the customer who pays what they can't, the citizen who gets into debt and keeps quiet. Those who live without reserves live in fear, and those who live in fear obey. My grandfather used to say, those who don't have their own bank end up being slaves to someone else's bank. There's an interesting fact. According to an OECD survey, more than 60% of people wouldn't be able to survive a single month without income. This means most live in a permanent state of emergency, and there's no peace possible where there's constant urgency. When everything you earn is spent, money turns to sand. The tighter it is, the more it slips away. And that's why the 20% is so important. It doesn't buy luxuries, it buys time. And time is the most expensive commodity in the world. But this part of the formula requires more than discipline, it requires the faith. Because saving is an act of trust. It's believing that the future is worth it. It's choosing not to spend now to have power later. It's like planting a seed you won't harvest yet. And perhaps that's why it's the step most people ignore. They say there's nothing left to save. But the secret is the opposite. It's not what's left that you save. It's what you save that starts to add up. Because when you decide that 20% is untouchable, the rest starts to fall into place naturally. Life reorganizes itself around what you respect. My father learned this from his grandfather. Every month, even in the worst times, he would put something aside. Sometimes it was small, almost symbolic, but the gesture was always the same. He would say, it's not the amount that matters, it's the ritual. And this habit kept him going when others were falling apart. I remember one time when he was out of work for months, yet he never despaired. When I asked him how he managed to stay calm, he replied, because I know I can wait, and those who can wait are already free. It's curious how modern society has made saving something almost obsolete. Everything revolves around rapid consumption, novelty, and immediate pleasure. But the ancients knew that haste is humanity's most expensive tax. Those who live in a rush pay twice for everything, for the product and for the anxiety. Saving is the opposite of this. It's declaring that you're not a hostage to haste. It's reminding yourself that life isn't a race, it's a construction. The 20% isn't about accumulating wealth, it's about preserving autonomy. It's the foundation of calm, the space that prevents fear from taking over. Because when there's reserve, there's choice. You can turn down an unfair job, end an abusive relationship, wait for the right opportunity. And each of these choices has a price. It's the price of freedom. Those who don't pay for it with discipline, pay with suffering. I learned this the hard way. When I started earning well, I thought I was free. But the truth is, I was spending it all. Every rent increase was accompanied by an increase in expenses. One day, something unexpected happened, an illness, a loss, and I realized that all the security I felt was just an illusion. I had to sell what I had, renegotiate what I owed, and start over. And that's when I understood the meaning of the 20%. Freedom isn't about having a lot. It's about being able to endure the unexpected without losing your dignity. My grandfather used to say that saving is a silent, almost spiritual act. No one sees it, no one applauds it, but time rewards it. He called the 20% the shield of the righteous. He said that each coin saved wisely was a prayer of tranquility for the future. And he was right. Because money isn't just physical. It carries the energy of decision. When you save it out of fear, it weighs. When you save it out of respect, it protects. And perhaps the most beautiful thing about this formula is realizing that it doesn't separate savings from emotions. It unites the two. Because deep down, saving isn't about money. It's about your relationship with yourself. It's your dialogue with the future. It's saying, I trust that tomorrow is worth my effort today. And when that confidence grows, you understand that you don't need to run. The 20% is what allows you to slow down. And it is at this slower, more conscious pace that true wealth appears. Because freedom doesn't begin when the money arrives. It begins when the fear goes away. And that is what the third number teaches. To live without chains, with a light heart and a peaceful mind. But there is something even bigger that ties all these numbers into a single truth. something that turns formula into philosophy. And that's what the last part is about. My grandfather used to say that the 40, 30, and 20 formula wasn't about money, it was about life. He believed that how a person organizes their resources is an exact reflection of how they organize their own mind. Those who live in disorder within themselves inevitably live in disorder outside as well. And perhaps this is the point the modern world has forgotten. Before achieving anything, one must achieve balance. Money, he said, is a mirror. It shows you every day what you truly believe. If you spend it to escape the void, it will never be enough. If you use it purposefully, it multiplies. And this multiplication isn't magic, it's logic. Because when the mind becomes clear, decisions become intelligent. The formula of the three numbers, 40 to live with respect, 30 to grow with wisdom, and 20 to be free, is simply the mathematical expression of a spiritual principle, mastery over oneself. But knowledge alone doesn't change anything. It needs to be transformed into action. And that's why my grandfather said that all wisdom is useless if it is not put into practice. So if you really want to apply this formula, start today. Not tomorrow, not when there's any left. Today. Grab a sheet of paper, a notebook, or even your cell phone's notepad. Write the amount of your last earnings. Now divide it into 3 parts. 40% for what sustains your life. Housing, food, family, what keeps the foundation firm. 30% for what helps you evolve. Books, courses, health, learning, experiences that make you better prepared for the future. 20% for what gives you freedom, a personal reserve, however small, that allows you to breathe without fear. You don't have to start perfect. Maybe today you can only save 5%, invest 10%, or are still trying to balance the basics. That's okay. What matters is not the size of the change, it's the act of starting. Because when you change the direction of the first step, the whole path changes along with it. Remember, money is just the messenger of your relationship with time. And time once spent does not come back. Therefore, learn to respect every penny as a minute of your life. Every expense is a choice. Every choice builds a destiny. Those who master their choices never feel poor again, because they understand that wealth is control with purpose. The 40% teaches you humility, living with what you need and being grateful for it. The 30% teaches you vision, to grow not out of greed, but out of a desire to serve and leave something better in the world. The 20% teaches you strength, the quiet power of being able to say no when the world demands submission. Together, these 3 numbers build a solid life, independent of crises, governments, and passing fads. And perhaps that is the true secret of ancient wisdom. It does not change with time, because it was created to resist it. The 40-30-20 formula isn't a modern technique. It's a way of thinking. It is the thought that has sustained families for centuries, through wars, scarcity, and transformations, because the principle is eternal. Whoever dominates what he has receives more. He who wastes what he has loses even what he believes he has. So look at your life today and ask yourself, do you have control over your money, or does it have control over you? Do you work by choice or necessity? Do you control your spending or just react to what comes your way? These questions hurt, but they are what opens space for freedom. Change doesn't start at the bank, nor with your salary. It starts in consciousness. When you start living in order, the world begins to respect you. And that's what my grandfather meant when he said, "Whoever creates structure creates destiny," because destiny is not luck, it is construction. And construction begins the moment you decide to live with purpose and discipline. If you've come this far, it means that something inside you has already awakened. Maybe a nuisance, maybe a calling. But this feeling is a sign that the transformation has already begun. And that's why, starting today, I want to leave you with a challenge. Choose a symbolic value and apply the formula for 21 days. It doesn't matter how much you earn. What matters is consistency. During these days, notice what changes. You will notice that money begins to obey your intention, and most importantly, you'll notice that your anxiety is starting to disappear. because the mind that finds order ceases to fear the future. That is true freedom, and it's in your hands now. If this message made sense to you, if something touched your heart, I invite you to continue this journey with me. Here, each video is a step closer to awareness, balance, and true prosperity, the kind that starts from within and changes everything around you. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this knowledge with anyone who needs to regain control of their lives. And if you want, tell us in the comments, anonymously if you prefer, which part of this formula challenged you the most or transformed you the most. Your story could be the push someone else needs to get started, because wisdom, like wealth, is only valuable when shared. And perhaps in the end, that was always the most important secret my grandfather wanted to teach me.